The slap echoed through the pristine showroom like a gunshot. Rebecca Hamilton stood frozen beside the gleaming Honda minivan, her left hand instinctively moving to cradle her 7-month pregnant belly while her right hand pressed against her burning cheek. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth where her teeth had cut into her inner lip. "I said we're buying the Maserati." Marcus Hamilton's voice carried that familiar edge that made Rebecca's stomach clench with familiar dread. His designer suit remained perfectly pressed despite the violence he'd just unleashed, his salt and pepper hair still immaculately styled. To anyone watching, he looked like exactly what he was, a billionaire husband accustomed to getting his way. The Honda's practical interior, with its safety ratings and cup holders, seemed to mock her now. She'd thought maybe, just maybe, she could convince him that their growing family needed something sensible, something normal, something that said they were just regular people preparing for their first child together. She should have known better. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." The voice came from across the showroom floor, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over Metropolitan Luxury Motors. Rebecca looked up to see a tall woman in a navy business suit striding toward them, her auburn hair pulled back in a professional bun, her green eyes blazing with righteous fury. Marcus turned, his expression shifting from controlled anger to calculating assessment. "Excuse me. You heard me." The woman's voice remained steady, professional, but Rebecca could hear the steel underneath. "You just assaulted a pregnant woman in my showroom. I'm calling the police." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the woman pull out her phone with practiced efficiency. There was something familiar about her face, something that tugged at memories Rebecca had tried to bury under years of Marcus's careful isolation. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus stepped closer to the woman, using his height and presence the way he always did when someone dared to challenge him. "I could buy this entire dealership with what I spend on lunch." The woman looked up from her phone, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Actually, Mr. Hamilton, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is, do you know who you're dealing with?" That's when Rebecca saw the name tag. Victoria Campbell Sullivan, General Manager. Tori. The recognition hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Her cousin Tori, who used to braid Rebecca's hair during summer visits to their grandmother's house. Tori, who had taught Rebecca how to throw a proper punch when they were 12, and the Jenkins boy wouldn't stop pulling her pigtails. Tori, who had been like a big sister until Rebecca's world had slowly, methodically shrunk to nothing but Marcus and his demands. "Tori?" Rebecca's voice came out as barely a whisper. Tori's expression softened for just a moment as their eyes met. "Hey, Becca. It's going to be okay." Marcus's head snapped between them, his pale blue eyes narrowing as he processed this new information. Rebecca could practically see his mind working, calculating this unexpected complication. "You two know each other?" His voice had gone dangerously quiet. "She's my cousin," Tori said simply, never taking her eyes off Marcus. "And if you ever lay another hand on her, you'll discover just how seriously I take family protection." The showroom had gone completely silent. Other customers had stopped their conversations, salespeople had abandoned their desks, and even the soft jazz playing over the speakers seemed muted. Bobby Kane, the young salesman who had been showing them the minivan, stood frozen beside the vehicle's open door, his face pale with shock. Rebecca felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. This was exactly the kind of scene Marcus hated, the kind of public attention that made him lose control in private later. She could already imagine the consequences, the locked doors, the cut phone lines, the careful bruises that never showed above the neckline of her conservative dresses. "Marcus, please," she started, but Tori held up a hand. "No, Becca, don't you dare apologize for his behavior." Tori's phone was already dialing. "Yes, I need to report a domestic violence incident at Metropolitan Luxury Motors on 5th Street. The perpetrator is still on scene." Marcus's perfectly controlled facade finally cracked. "You have no idea what you've just done," he hissed at Tori. "I will destroy you. I will destroy this place. I will make sure you never work in this city again." Hashun. Tori finished her call and slipped the phone back into her jacket pocket. "Mr. Hamilton, I've been managing car dealerships for 15 years. I've dealt with entitled men who think their money makes them untouchable before. The difference is, this time you made it personal. She turned to address the entire showroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disturbance. Our security team will escort Mr. Hamilton from the premises immediately. Two uniformed security guards appeared as if summoned, moving with practiced efficiency toward Marcus. He looked around the showroom, perhaps finally realizing how many people had witnessed his loss of control. His expensive lawyers weren't here to clean this up. His usual intimidation tactics weren't working. For once in his carefully controlled life, Marcus Hamilton was facing consequences in real time. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Rebecca, and she felt the familiar chill of his threats settle over her like a shroud. But Tori stepped between them. "Actually, it is. Security will escort you to your car. Any further contact with Rebecca goes through her attorney. Any attempts to return to this property will be considered trespassing." As the guards flanked Marcus, he straightened his tie and smoothed his jacket, rebuilding his composed exterior, even as his eyes promised retribution. "Rebecca, you'll come home with me now. We'll discuss this privately." For 22 months of marriage, those words would have sent Rebecca scrambling to obey, to minimize the damage, to somehow find a way to make this her fault so Marcus's anger would be justified and therefore controllable. But something had changed in the last 5 minutes. Maybe it was seeing Tori again, remembering what it felt like to have someone stand up for her. Maybe it was the shock of having witnesses to Marcus's behavior, people who couldn't be bought or intimidated into silence. Maybe it was the protective instinct she felt for the baby growing inside her, the fierce maternal love that had been steadily growing stronger than her fear. "No," Rebecca said quietly. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Marcus stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "What did you say?" "I said no." This time her voice was stronger. "I'm not going home with you." The security guards moved closer as Marcus's face flushed red with rage. For a moment, Rebecca thought he might strike her again. Consequences be damned. But the approaching sound of sirens seemed to break whatever spell had held him. "You'll regret this, Rebecca," he said softly, and she knew he meant every word. "Both of you will regret this more than you can possibly imagine." Then he was gone, escorted from the building, while the other customers watched with undisguised curiosity and whispered conversations began to buzz around the showroom. Tori immediately moved to Rebecca's side, gently taking her arm. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" Rebecca shook her head, though her cheek still throbbed and she could feel it beginning to swell. "I'm okay. The baby's okay." She paused, looking into her cousin's familiar green eyes. "Tori, I can't believe it's really you." "Believe it, honey. And I'm not going anywhere this time." Tori's voice carried a promise that Rebecca desperately wanted to trust. "But we need to get you checked out, just to be safe. My sister Sarah is an obstetrician at General Hospital. She'll take good care of you." As if on cue, the police sirens grew louder, and Rebecca felt a new kind of fear settle in her chest. She'd spent so long living in Marcus's carefully controlled world that the idea of involving outside authorities felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "Tori," she whispered urgently, "you don't understand what he's capable of. The things he can do to people who cross him. He'll come after you, your family, your job. Let him try." Tori's smile was sharp and determined. "He's not the only one with resources, Becca, and he's definitely not the only one who understands how to fight dirty when it comes to protecting family." The police cars pulled into the parking lot, their red and blue lights painting the showroom windows in shifting colors. Rebecca watched them approach and felt something she hadn't experienced in almost 2 years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could finally end. But as Tori squeezed her hand reassuringly, Rebecca couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's parting words. She knew her billionaire husband better than anyone, knew how his mind worked when his control was threatened. This wasn't the end of anything. This was just the beginning of a war. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, lady. Summerny." Marcus's words still echoed in Tori's mind an hour later, as she sat in the dealership's security office, watching the digital footage for the third time. The high-definition cameras had captured everything. Marcus's controlled approach, Rebecca's hesitant explanation about needing a family vehicle, the moment his facade cracked, and the sharp sound of palm meeting flesh. Detective James Sullivan leaned forward in his chair, studying the timestamp with professional interest. Clean footage, multiple angles. This'll hold up in court, no problem. Tori felt a familiar surge of gratitude for her husband's calm competence. Even after 8 years of marriage, James still had the ability to make chaotic situations feel manageable with his steady presence and analytical mind. What about his threats afterward? Tori asked, rewinding to show Marcus's parting words to both her and Rebecca. Intimidation of witnesses, criminal threats. We can add those to the domestic assault charges. James made notes in his small leather notebook, the same one he'd carried since his detective promotion 5 years ago. The question is whether Rebecca will press charges. Through the office window, Tori could see Rebecca sitting in the showroom's customer lounge, clutching a cup of tea with both hands while Bobby Kane hovered nearby, clearly shaken by what he'd witnessed. The young salesman had been working at Metropolitan Luxury for only 6 months, and Tori suspected this was his first exposure to the darker side of their affluent clientele. She's terrified, James. You should have seen her face when he told her to come home with him, like a trapped animal. James closed his notebook and studied his wife's expression. After nearly a decade together, he knew that particular look, the one she got when someone threatened her family. He'd seen it twice before. Once when a drunk driver had hit their nephew's school bus, and once when a contractor had tried to swindle Tori's elderly parents out of their retirement savings. Tell me about your cousin. How long has it been since you've seen her? Tori pulled up Rebecca's Facebook profile on her computer, scrolling through the carefully curated posts that painted a picture of perfect marital bliss. Expensive restaurants, designer clothes, luxury vacations, all featuring Rebecca's increasingly strained smile and Marcus's possessive arm around her waist. 3 years, maybe 4. She gradually stopped coming to family gatherings after she married him, always had some excuse. Marcus had business trips, social obligations, headaches. Tori's voice grew bitter. I thought she'd just gotten swept up in her new wealthy lifestyle. I never imagined. She stopped, studying a photo from Rebecca's wedding. Her cousin looked radiant in an elaborate gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, but her smile seemed brittle around the edges. Marcus stood beside her in perfect formal wear, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. Look at this, Tori pointed to the screen. Every single photo has him touching her somehow. Hand on her shoulder, arm around her waist, fingers on her arm. It's like he's marking territory. James moved closer to examine the photos with his trained eye for details others might miss. Classic control behavior. He's establishing ownership in every public appearance. He pointed to a group shot from what appeared to be a charity gala. Look at her body language here. She's turned slightly away from him, but his grip on her arm has pulled her back into position. God, how did I miss this? How did our whole family miss this? Because he's good at it, James said gently. Guys like Hamilton don't start with obvious abuse. They begin with charm, expensive gifts, romantic gestures. They isolate their victims gradually, systematically. By the time the real abuse starts, the woman has already been cut off from her support network. A soft knock interrupted them, and Bobby Kane peeked through the office doorway. Mrs. Sullivan, your cousin is asking for you. She seems pretty upset. Tori hurried to the customer lounge where Rebecca sat with tears streaming down her face. The pregnancy glow everyone always talked about was absent. Instead, Rebecca looked exhausted and pale, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Becca, honey, what's wrong? I just realized what I've done, Rebecca whispered. He's going to make me pay for this, Tori. He's going to make all of us pay. Tori sat down beside her cousin, careful not to move too quickly or crowd her space. James had taught her about trauma responses, how sudden movements could trigger fight-or-flight reactions in abuse victims. Tell me what you're thinking about. His first wife, Rebecca said so quietly Tori had to lean forward to hear her. Elena, she died in a car accident 6 months after their divorce was finalized. Single vehicle crash, no witnesses. Marcus inherited everything because she hadn't updated her will yet. The customer lounge suddenly felt cold despite the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Tori exchanged a quick glance with James, who had been listening from the doorway. Rebecca, James said gently, moving to sit across from them, are you suggesting that your husband was involved in his first wife's death? I don't know. Maybe. I just know that Marcus doesn't lose. Ever. He told me once that people who try to leave him always regret it. Rebecca's hand moved protectively to her belly. What if he tries to hurt the baby? What if he tries to hurt you for helping me? Tori reached for her cousin's free hand, squeezing gently. Do you remember when we were kids and that group of older boys was picking on you at the county fair? Despite her tears, Rebecca smiled slightly. You grabbed a baseball bat from the ring toss game and chased them halfway across the fairgrounds. That's right. And what did I tell you afterward? That nobody messes with family on your watch. Exactly. And that hasn't changed, Becca. Not in 20 years, not ever. Tori's voice carried absolute conviction. Marcus Hamilton has money. I'll give him that. But I've got something he doesn't understand. What's that? A family that fights back. James's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. He glanced at the screen and frowned. That's interesting. Marcus Hamilton just called in a complaint about this dealership to the city licensing board, alleging fraudulent business practices and demanding an immediate investigation. That was fast, Tori said grimly. What else? 3 separate online review sites just received identical 1-star reviews of Metropolitan Luxury Motors, all posted within the last 30 minutes. All claiming poor customer service and recommending people avoid this location. Rebecca's face went white. He's starting already. Tori, you have to distance yourself from me. Close down whatever investigation the police started. Pretend this never happened. Like hell I will. You don't understand. No, Becca, you don't understand. Tori stood up, pacing to the window where she could see Marcus's black Bentley pulling back into the parking lot. That's his mistake. He thinks having money makes him untouchable. But I've been dealing with entitled customers for 15 years, and I know something he doesn't. What? The bigger they are, the harder they fall when someone finally stands up to them. Nasher T. The Bentley's driver's side door opened, and Marcus stepped out, now accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits who could only be lawyers. He'd regrouped quickly, assembled his professional damage control team, and returned for round 2. James was already on his radio, calling for backup units. All cars, this is Detective Sullivan, requesting additional units at Metropolitan Luxury Motors for a potential domestic situation. Suspect has returned to the scene with legal counsel. Tori, Rebecca pleaded, please don't do this. He'll destroy everything you've worked for. Tori watched Marcus approach the showroom entrance, flanked by his legal team like some kind of corporate war party. For a moment, she felt a flicker of doubt. Metropolitan Luxury Motors represented 15 years of her career, countless 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and sacrificed weekends. Marcus Hamilton probably could destroy it all with a few strategic phone calls. But then she looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, the cousin who used to sneak extra cookies from their grandmother's kitchen and share them in their secret fort behind the old barn. The girl who had cried when Tori left for college because she wouldn't have anyone to protect her from the mean kids at school. The woman who was now carrying a child and living in terror of the man who claimed to love her. Actually, Mr. Hamilton, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Tori murmured, remembering her words from earlier. The question is, do you know who you're dealing with? She turned back to Rebecca with a smile that carried 20 years of protective instinct and stubborn family loyalty. Honey, he's about to find out that some things are more important than money, and some people are too stupid to know when they picked a fight they can't win. Outside, Marcus Hamilton straightened his tie and prepared for battle, completely unaware that he'd just declared war on the wrong family. Marcus Hamilton, you're under arrest. The words cut through the showroom's tension like a blade, delivered in Detective James Sullivan's calm, professional tone. Marcus had entered the building flanked by his 2 attorneys, clearly expecting his legal team's presence to intimidate the small-town car dealership into backing down from their accusations. He hadn't expected to walk into a coordinated police response. James stood near the customer service counter with his partner, Detective Lisa Park, both of them wearing the kind of relaxed alertness that came from 20 years of combined law enforcement experience. 2 uniformed officers flanked the showroom's exits, and Tori could see additional patrol cars positioned strategically in the parking lot. On what charges? Demanded the taller of Marcus's attorneys. A silver-haired man whose $1,000 suit and imperious bearing screamed corporate law firm. Domestic assault in the third degree, criminal intimidation, and threats against witnesses, James replied, pulling handcuffs from his belt with practiced efficiency. Turn around, Mr. Hamilton. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, but Tori noticed his voice had lost some of its earlier authority. I barely touched her. It was a private marital dispute that got slightly out of hand. Detective Park stepped forward, her dark eyes sharp with professional skepticism. Sir, we have security footage showing you striking a pregnant woman with sufficient force to leave visible marks. We have multiple witnesses, including trained security personnel. And we have recorded threats against both the victim and the establishment's management. Which makes this very much not a private matter, James added, moving behind Marcus. Hands behind your back, please. The silver-haired attorney moved to intercede. Detective, my client is worth approximately $800 million. He has extensive business interests in this community, employs over 3,000 people locally, and sits on the boards of 4 major charities. Surely we can handle this situation with appropriate discretion. James paused in his arrest procedure to meet the lawyer's gaze directly. Sir, I don't care if your client is worth $8 billion. In the state of Colorado, domestic violence is a mandatory arrest offense. When we have clear evidence of assault against a pregnant victim, discretion means doing our jobs properly. He resumed cuffing Marcus with smooth efficiency. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. This is a mistake, Marcus interrupted, his composure finally beginning to crack. A huge mistake. Do you have any idea what I can do to your career? What I can do to this entire department? Detective Park stepped closer, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made seasoned criminals reconsider their life choices. Mr. Hamilton, I strongly advise you to listen to your Miranda rights instead of making additional threats against law enforcement officers. We tend to take those very seriously. While James finished the arrest procedure, Tori moved to where Rebecca sat in the customer lounge. Her cousin had watched the entire scene with a mixture of relief and terror, one hand pressed protectively against her belly, the other gripping the armrest of her chair until her knuckles showed white. How are you holding up? Tori asked softly. I can't believe this is really happening, Rebecca whispered. In 2 years of marriage, no one has ever... She stopped, shaking her head. He's going to be so angry, Tori. When he gets out, when his lawyers fix this, he's going to be furious. When he gets out, he'll have learned that there are consequences for his actions. Dr. Sarah Campbell arrived just as Marcus was being escorted to the patrol car, her medical bag in hand and her auburn hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that made her look remarkably like her older sister. Tori had called her 20 minutes earlier, knowing Rebecca needed medical attention, but suspecting she wouldn't go to a hospital emergency room where Marcus might have contacts or influence. Becca? Sarah approached with the gentle manner that made her one of the most requested obstetricians in the city. I'm Sarah Campbell, Tori's sister. I understand you've had a difficult afternoon. Rebecca looked up at the doctor with obvious relief. Having medical attention from someone connected to Tori felt safer than trusting unknown hospital staff who might report back to Marcus. The baby, Rebecca said urgently. Is the baby okay? He hit me pretty hard and I felt some cramping afterward. Let's find out. Can we use your office? Sarah asked Tori, who immediately led them toward the management suite. As they walked past the windows overlooking the parking lot, Rebecca could see Marcus's black Bentley being impounded, while his attorneys gestured angrily at the uniformed officers. The sight of her billionaire husband in handcuffs, surrounded by police cars, felt surreal and terrifying in equal measure. Dr. Campbell, Rebecca said as Sarah began her examination, there's something else you need to know. Something Marcus doesn't know about the pregnancy. Tori looked up from where she'd been giving Rebecca privacy by reviewing paperwork at her desk. What do you mean? Rebecca's face flushed with shame and fear. The baby isn't Marcus's. The words hung in the air like a ticking bomb. Sarah's hand stilled for a moment before she continued her gentle examination, but Tori could see the implications racing across her sister's face. How certain are you? Sarah asked clinically. Completely certain. Marcus tracks my cycle obsessively. He has for months. He wants children, but only when he decides the timing is optimal for his business schedule and public image. Rebecca's voice grew bitter. But there was a weekend in March when he was in Switzerland on business. An old friend came to town, someone I knew before I married Marcus. Michael Torres, Rebecca continued, her voice barely audible. We went to high school together, dated senior year. He was in Denver for a medical conference, and we met for coffee. Just coffee at first. But then we started talking about how different our lives had become and how isolated I'd been feeling. And it's okay, Tori said gently. You don't have to explain yourself to us. Some don't, but I do, because you need to understand why this changes everything. Tears began streaming down Rebecca's face. Michael died in a car accident 6 weeks later. A drunk driver ran a red light in Phoenix where he was doing his residency. He never knew about the pregnancy. Nobody knows except me. Sarah finished her examination and helped Rebecca sit up. The baby appears to be perfectly healthy. Heart rate is strong, movement is normal, and there's no sign of trauma from today's incident. But Becca, this information about paternity, Marcus is going to find out eventually. How? Blood type, genetic traits, timing of the birth if you go full term. Men who are controlling about reproduction tend to pay very close attention to those details. The office fell silent, except for the muffled sounds of the police activity outside. Tori could see her cousin's mind racing through the implications, calculating how this secret would affect Marcus's reaction when he discovered it. He'll kill me, Rebecca said simply. If he finds out this baby isn't his, if he realizes I had an affair, he'll actually kill me. Not divorce me, not just destroy my life financially. He'll kill me. No, he won't, Tori said firmly, because we're not going to let that happen. Her phone buzzed with a text message from James. Hamilton's being processed downtown. Lawyers demanding immediate bail hearing. How's Rebecca? Tori showed the message to her sister, who frowned thoughtfully. Becca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Has Marcus ever hurt you before today? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded protectively over her belly. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet they had to lean forward to hear her. Not hit me, no. But there have been other things. Times when he's grabbed my arms hard enough to leave bruises. Times when he's pushed me against walls during arguments. Once he held me underwater in our swimming pool because I contradicted him in front of his business partners. Sarah's expression grew grim. That's attempted murder, Becca. Domestic violence isn't just hitting. It's any pattern of behavior designed to control, intimidate, or harm. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad because he never actually punched me, because he was always careful not to leave marks that would show, because he'd apologize afterward and buy me expensive gifts. Tori felt a surge of rage so intense it made her dizzy. Her sweet, gentle cousin had been living in terror while their entire family assumed she was just busy with her new wealthy lifestyle. Why didn't you reach out? Why didn't you tell someone? He monitors my phone, my email, my social media. He has tracking apps on everything. He knows where I go, who I talk to, how long I'm gone. Rebecca's voice carried the flat exhaustion of someone who had given up fighting. And he made it clear what would happen to anyone who tried to help me. What do you mean? He showed me articles about his business competitors who had crossed him, companies that went bankrupt overnight, executives who lost their jobs mysteriously, families who had to move out of state because of sudden financial problems. Rebecca met Tori's eyes. He said that's what happens to people who interfere with his personal life. Sarah packed up her medical bag with sharp, efficient movements. Tori, we need to call a family meeting, tonight, at your house. Why? Because Becca can't go home, and Marcus will be out on bail by morning. We need a protection plan, and we need it fast. Through the office window, they could see Marcus's impounded Bentley being loaded onto a tow truck, while crime scene technicians photographed the showroom where the assault had occurred. For the first time in 2 years, Marcus Hamilton's perfect control had been shattered by consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. But as Tori watched the tow truck drive away, she couldn't shake the feeling that today's victory was just the opening move in a much longer, more dangerous game. Becca, she said quietly, there's something else you need to know about the pregnancy. Something I found in your medical records that Marcus doesn't know about. The baby isn't Marcus's. Dr. Sarah Campbell's words hung in the air of Tori's living room, like smoke from a fire that couldn't be contained. The emergency family meeting had assembled quickly. Tori and James, Rebecca with an overnight bag, hastily packed while Marcus was still being processed downtown, and now Sarah with medical records that changed everything. I ran a more thorough examination after what you told me this afternoon, Sarah continued, spreading prenatal charts across the coffee table. Based on fetal development, crown to rump length, and other growth markers, conception occurred approximately 28 weeks ago. That puts us in mid-March. Rebecca sat curled in the corner of Tori's sectional sofa, wrapped in an oversized sweater that belonged to James, looking younger than her 30 years. March 15th weekend. Marcus was in Switzerland for the pharmaceutical acquisition meetings. And that's when you saw Michael Torres, Tori said gently. We met Saturday afternoon for coffee at the little place on 16th Street Mall, the one where we used to go when we were dating in high school. Rebecca's voice carried the weight of complicated grief. We talked for hours about how different our lives had become. He was doing his emergency medicine residency in Phoenix, working 100-hour weeks. But he seemed so passionate about helping people. So alive. Sarah made notes on her tablet. What happened next? He asked if I was happy in my marriage, and I started crying right there in the coffee shop because I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me that question. Rebecca's hands moved protectively to her belly. He walked me back to my car, but we kept talking about our dreams, about the people we used to be before adult responsibilities changed us. Rebecca, James said carefully, we need to know exactly what happened that weekend because Marcus is going to scrutinize every detail once he starts suspecting paternity issues. The room fell quiet except for the gentle hum of the heating system. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, coating Tori's neighborhood in deceptive peace, while they planned for a war none of them had wanted. Saturday night, Marcus called from Zurich. He was drunk, celebrating some business deal, bragging about how much money he'd made in a single afternoon. He kept talking about all the things he was going to buy, all the ways his success would benefit me. Rebecca's voice grew bitter. Then he started describing the woman he'd met at his hotel bar, how young and beautiful she was, how impressed she was with his wealth. Tori felt James tense beside her. In their 8 years of marriage, her husband had never once made her feel like she was competing with other women for his attention or affection. He was cheating on you, Sarah said, not asking a question. He's been cheating on me since our honeymoon. Different women, different cities, but always the same pattern. He tells me about them afterward, describes them in detail, compares them to me. Rebecca wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He says it keeps me motivated to be a better wife. That's psychological abuse, James said quietly. Systematic emotional torture designed to break down your self-esteem and make you dependent on his approval. I know that now, but that night, after 2 years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't exciting enough, wasn't worth his faithfulness, Rebecca trailed off. You called Michael, Tori guessed. I called Michael, and he came over. We talked until sunrise about everything Marcus had taken away from me, my friends, my job, my confidence, my sense of who I was before I became Mrs. Marcus Hamilton. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like myself again. Like the person I used to be still existed somewhere. Sarah checked her notes, and Michael died 6 weeks later. April 27. Drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection near Phoenix General Hospital. Michael was driving home from a 36-hour shift in the emergency department. Fresh tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. He was trying to save lives, trying to make the world better, and some selfish bastard who couldn't call an Uber took that away from him. Did you know you were pregnant when he died? I found out 3 days after his funeral. I'd been feeling sick, thought it was grief and stress. When the pregnancy test came back positive, I almost had a breakdown. Rebecca looked around the room at the 3 people who now knew her most dangerous secret. Marcus was so happy when I told him. He started making plans immediately. Private schools, trust funds, public announcements about expanding the Hamilton family legacy. The implications settled over them like a storm front. Marcus Hamilton, control freak and narcissist, believed he was about to become a father. The child would be his heir, his legacy, his genetic continuation. When he discovered the truth, and men like Marcus always discovered the truth eventually, his rage would be nuclear. How long do we have? Tori asked. Sarah consulted her medical charts. If Rebecca goes to full term, she's due in early November, but Marcus is going to start noticing discrepancies soon. Blood type incompatibilities, genetic traits that don't match his family line, maybe even requesting paternity tests for insurance or legal purposes. I know. Or he might demand genetic testing just to satisfy his need to control everything, James added grimly. Men who track their wives' menstrual cycles aren't usually the type to simply trust paternity claims. Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing to the living room window, where she could see the peaceful suburban street beyond. Tori's neighborhood represented everything Marcus's world wasn't. Ordinary people living normal lives without bodyguards or surveillance or the constant fear of public scandal. Maybe I should just disappear, Rebecca said quietly. Leave the state, start over somewhere he can't find me. With what money? Tori asked gently. What resources? Marcus controls all your finances, right? Everything. Credit cards, bank accounts, even my cell phone plan. He gives me an allowance for household expenses, but he reviews every purchase. I haven't had independent access to money in almost 2 years. James pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. I know someone who might be able to help. Grace Mitchell. She's a family law attorney who specializes in domestic violence cases. She's helped other women escape situations like yours. Can we trust her? She's been my mom's best friend since college. She knows how to handle high-profile divorce cases where one spouse has significantly more resources than the other. Sarah packed up her medical files with practiced efficiency. I'm going to set you up with a new obstetrician, someone Marcus doesn't know, someone who understands the sensitivity of the situation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh at Community Medical Center. She's helped other women in similar circumstances. Similar circumstances? Women whose pregnancies put them in danger from abusive partners. Women who needed medical care outside their usual social circles. Women who needed doctors willing to keep certain information confidential. Tori felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather. How often does this happen? More than you'd think. Wealthy, powerful men who view their wives and children as possessions aren't exactly rare. Most of the time, the women are too isolated and financially dependent to leave. Marcus made a mistake today. He lost control in public. Which gives us an opportunity, James said, but only if we move fast and smart. Rebecca turned from the window, her expression carrying new determination. What do you need me to do? First, you're staying here tonight. Marcus made bail an hour ago, and his lawyers are already working on getting the charges reduced or dismissed. He's probably at home right now, planning his next move. Won't he come here looking for me? James smiled grimly. Let him try. This house has excellent security systems, and I have very good relationships with the patrol officers in this district. Plus, Marcus striking a pregnant woman in public has made him some enemies in law enforcement. Sarah stood to leave, gathering her coat and medical bag. I'll call Dr. Walsh first thing in the morning and set up an appointment. In the meantime, if you experience any cramping, bleeding, or unusual pain, call me immediately. The baby seems healthy, but stress can cause complications. After Sarah left, the three of them sat in the quiet living room, processing the magnitude of what they were facing. Marcus Hamilton wasn't just wealthy, he was vengeful, controlling, and now publicly humiliated. Men like him didn't accept defeat. They escalated until they won or destroyed everything trying. Tori, Rebecca said quietly, I need you to understand what you're risking by helping me. Marcus doesn't just go after people who cross him. He goes after their families, their businesses, their entire support networks. Good thing our family doesn't scare easily. I'm serious. He could destroy the dealership. He could get James transferred or demoted. He could make your lives miserable in ways you can't imagine. Tori exchanged a look with her husband, one of those wordless conversations that long marriages made possible. They talked about having children someday, about the kind of parents they wanted to be, about the values they'd want to pass down. Neither of them had imagined their first real test of protective instincts would involve Tori's cousin and an unborn child, whose father was dead. Becca, Tori said finally, when we were kids and that group of older boys was picking on you at the county fair, what did I tell you? Despite everything, Rebecca smiled slightly, that nobody messes with family on your watch. That's right. And I meant it then, and I mean it now. Tori's voice carried absolute conviction. Marcus Hamilton has money, lawyers, and influence. But we have something he doesn't understand and can't buy. What's that? People who love you enough to fight back. Outside, snow continued to fall on the quiet suburban street. But inside Tori's house, three people began planning for the kind of war that money couldn't win. The kind fought with family loyalty, stubborn courage, and the fierce determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The battle for Rebecca's freedom was about to begin in earnest. We're getting you out. Tonight. Patricia Morrison's voice carried the same no-nonsense authority she'd used as a registered nurse for 35 years. The tone that had calmed panicked patients and intimidated uncooperative doctors in equal measure. Becca's mother stood in Tori's kitchen at 7 o'clock Tuesday morning, her silver hair pulled back in its customary neat bun, her blue eyes blazing with protective fury. "Mom, how did you—" Rebecca started. "Your cousin called me at 5 this morning. I drove straight through from Boulder." Patty set her purse down with decisive finality. "Daniel's driving down from Fort Collins. He'll be here within the hour." Rebecca felt a complicated mix of relief and terror at seeing her family mobilize so quickly. For 2 years, Marcus had systematically isolated her from everyone she loved, making family visits difficult and eventually impossible. Now her mother and younger brother were racing to her defense, and she wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified about what their involvement might cost them. "Mrs. Morrison," James said carefully, "you need to understand what we're dealing with here. Marcus Hamilton has significant resources and a history of retaliating against people who interfere with his personal life." Patty fixed the detective with a steady stare that had probably been perfected on unruly teenagers decades earlier. "Detective Sullivan, I raised 2 children as a single mother after my husband died in Iraq. I've dealt with bullies before, and I don't care how much money they have." Tori poured coffee for everyone, the familiar morning ritual helping to ground the surreal situation in something normal and manageable. "Mom, we need to be smart about this. Marcus isn't just wealthy, he's dangerous. Yesterday, he assaulted Rebecca in public. Today, he's probably planning how to make us all pay for embarrassing him. Which is why we need to move fast," came a new voice from the kitchen doorway. Daniel Morrison looked like a younger, taller version of his sister with the same dark brown hair and gentle features. But his profession as a social worker had given him a hard edge that hadn't been there when Rebecca last saw him at Christmas 2 years ago. He carried a manila folder thick with documents and wore the expression of someone who had seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by anything. "Danny," Rebecca breathed, rising to hug her brother. "Hey, Becca." Daniel's embrace was fierce and protective. "I'm sorry it took something like this for us to see each other again." "What's in the folder?" James asked. Daniel set the documents on the kitchen table with the efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis intervention. "Everything I could pull together on Marcus Hamilton in 4 hours of research. Financial records, business dealings, legal history, and most importantly, patterns of behavior with previous relationships." "Previous relationships?" Tori asked. 3 significant relationships before Rebecca. All ended badly. Very badly. Daniel opened the folder to reveal newspaper clippings, court documents, and printed internet articles. Elena Rodriguez, his first wife, supposedly died in a single-car accident 6 months after their divorce was finalized. Rebecca's face went white. "I told you about Elena yesterday." "Right. But what you didn't know is that Elena had filed for a restraining order 2 weeks before her death. Claims of domestic violence, financial threats, intimidation." Daniel pointed to a police report. "The restraining order was dismissed when she died, so the case never went to court." Patty leaned forward to examine the documents with the sharp attention to detail that had made her an excellent nurse. "What about the other relationships?" "Sarah Chen, a pharmaceutical researcher he dated for 8 months in 2021. She broke up with him and moved to Seattle. Within 6 months, she'd lost her job, her security clearance, and her professional reputation. Someone had leaked falsified research data claiming she was involved in academic fraud." "And the third woman?" "Jennifer Walsh. Yes, the same Dr. Walsh that Sarah Campbell recommended yesterday. She dated Marcus briefly in 2022 before she understood what kind of man he was. She ended the relationship, and suddenly her practice started getting anonymous complaints to the medical board, negative online reviews, and her malpractice insurance was canceled under suspicious circumstances. The kitchen fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus's pattern wasn't just controlling behavior. It was systematic destruction of anyone who dared to reject or expose him. "How do you know all this?" James asked. "Because Dr. Walsh is one of the consulting physicians for our domestic violence intervention program. When I called her this morning and mentioned Rebecca's situation, she told me everything. She's been waiting years for someone to build a case against Marcus Hamilton." Rebecca sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the scope of her husband's vindictive nature. "He's going to do the same things to all of you. Your jobs, your reputations, your lives. He'll destroy everything." "Not if we get there first," Daniel said grimly. "Dr. Walsh has been documenting Marcus's pattern of retaliation for 3 years. She's also been working with other women who've been targeted by wealthy, connected abusers. There's an entire network of professionals who specialize in protecting victims from high-powered predators." Tori's phone buzzed with an urgent text message. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "That's my general manager. Marcus Hamilton just made an offer to buy the building that houses Metropolitan Luxury Motors. He's offering 30% above market value for immediate sale." "Classic intimidation tactic," Daniel said. "He's going after your livelihood to pressure you into abandoning Rebecca." James received his own text message and swore under his breath. "Internal Affairs just announced they're reviewing my conduct during yesterday's arrest. Anonymous complaint claiming I used excessive force and violated Marcus's civil rights." "It's starting," Rebecca whispered. "I told you this would happen. He's going to destroy all of you, and it's my fault." Patty reached across the table to grasp her daughter's hands. "Rebecca Marie Morrison Hamilton, you listen to me. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be abused. You didn't ask to be isolated, and you certainly didn't ask to be threatened. That man chose to be a monster, and now he's going to face the consequences." "But Mom, no buts. We're family, and family protects each other. Period." Patty's voice carried absolute conviction. "Your father died protecting this country because he believes some things are worth fighting for. Well, his daughter is worth fighting for too." Daniel consulted his notes. "Dr. Walsh gave me contact information for Grace Mitchell, the attorney James mentioned yesterday. She's expecting our call at 9 o'clock. She specializes in high-asset divorce cases where there's domestic violence involved." "What about immediate safety?" Tori asked. "Marcus made bail last night. He could show up here, at the dealership, at Mom's house." "Already handled," James said. "I called in some favors. There are going to be extra patrols in this neighborhood, at your work location, and at Mrs. Morrison's address in Boulder. Unmarked cars, but visible enough that Marcus will know he's being watched." Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, the sensation of being protected instead of controlled. Her family had mobilized with military efficiency, creating a network of support that Marcus's money couldn't simply buy away. "There's something else," Daniel said carefully. "Something you need to know about the pregnancy." Everyone turned to look at him. Rebecca felt her stomach clench with familiar fear. "Dr. Walsh ran some additional research after I told her about your situation. Rebecca, when Marcus finds out this baby isn't his biological child, you're going to be in mortal danger." "I know that already." "No, I don't think you understand how serious this is. Dr. Walsh has worked with 3 other women whose wealthy, controlling partners discovered paternity issues. One was hospitalized with mysterious poisoning. One disappeared entirely. The police never found her body. The third was killed in what was ruled a home invasion, but nothing was stolen." The kitchen fell completely silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Outside, normal suburban life continued. Neighbors leaving for work, children walking to school buses, delivery trucks making their rounds. Inside Tori's house, they were planning for a war that most people couldn't imagine. "How long do we have?" Patty asked. "Not long," Sarah Campbell's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Tori had given her a key years ago, and she'd let herself in through the garage entrance. "I've been thinking about this all night. Marcus is going to start asking questions soon. Medical questions, genetic questions, timeline questions." "What kind of questions?" "Blood type compatibility for starters. If the baby's blood type is incompatible with Marcus's, he'll know something's wrong. Then there are physical characteristics: hair color, eye color, facial features. Michael Torres was Hispanic, right? If the baby shows obvious Latino characteristics, Rebecca nodded miserably. Michael had beautiful dark eyes and olive skin. If the baby looks like him instead of Marcus. We need to move the timeline up, Daniel said decisively. Instead of waiting for Marcus to discover the truth, we need to get Rebecca to safety before he starts asking the right questions. Tori's phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID with surprise. It's Grace Mitchell, she answered on speakerphone. Ms. Mitchell? Ms. Campbell Sullivan, I've been reviewing the situation with your cousin. I'm moving up our appointment. Can you all be at my office in 2 hours? Why the rush? Because Marcus Hamilton's legal team just filed for an emergency injunction claiming Rebecca is mentally unstable due to pregnancy hormones and needs to be committed for psychiatric evaluation. They're asking for immediate custody of the unborn child and claiming she's a danger to herself and the baby. Rebecca felt the room spin around her as the full scope of Marcus's counterattack became clear. He wasn't just retaliating against her family. He was trying to have her declared incompetent so he could maintain control of what he believed was his child. Can he do that? James asked. With enough money and the right medical experts, he can certainly try. And if he succeeds, Rebecca will be locked in a psychiatric facility while he gains legal custody of the baby. By the time she's released, if she's released, the child will be legally his, and she'll have no parental rights whatsoever. The war Marcus Hamilton had declared was escalating faster than any of them had anticipated. He's not just rich, he's dangerous. Grace Mitchell's law office occupied the top floor of a downtown Denver building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the Rocky Mountains. But the elegant surroundings did nothing to soften the harsh reality she laid out for Rebecca and her family. Marcus Hamilton doesn't just have money, Grace continued, spreading legal documents across the polished conference table. He has the kind of wealth that purchases silence, cooperation, and blind loyalty. Judges who depend on his political contributions, police officers whose pension funds are invested in his companies, medical professionals who rely on his charitable donations to keep their facilities running. Rebecca sat between her mother and Tori, trying to process the scope of what they were facing. The emergency psychiatric evaluation order lay in front of her, signed by a judge she'd never heard of, requesting that she be placed on an involuntary 72-hour hold for assessment of pregnancy-related mental health issues. Dr. Harrison Blackwood is the psychiatrist Marcus's team has chosen to conduct the evaluation, Grace said, pointing to the signature at the bottom of the form. He's testified in 12 previous cases involving wealthy men who needed their wives declared mentally incompetent. He's never found a woman competent to make her own decisions. Daniel leaned forward, his social worker instincts engaged. That's not legally possible. You can't just buy psychiatric evaluations. You'd be surprised what creative legal interpretation can accomplish when you have unlimited resources, Grace replied grimly. Dr. Blackwood will claim that Rebecca's accusations of domestic violence are pregnancy-induced paranoid delusions. He'll say her irrational behavior at the car dealership, meaning her refusal to obey her husband's commands, demonstrates that she's a danger to herself and her unborn child. James studied the documents with professional interest. What's the timeline on this? The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. If the judge grants the order, Rebecca will be taken directly from the courthouse to Mountain View Psychiatric Facility for evaluation. Mountain View, Patty said with recognition. That's a private facility, isn't it? Owned by Hamilton Medical Enterprises, one of Marcus's subsidiary companies, Grace confirmed. Once Rebecca is inside that facility, Marcus will have complete control over her medical care, her communication with the outside world, and the conditions of her treatment. The conference room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Rebecca felt the familiar panic rising in her chest, the same suffocating sensation she'd experienced countless times during her marriage, when Marcus's control tightened around her like a noose. There has to be something we can do, Tori said desperately. There is, but it's risky, Grace replied. We can fight the psychiatric hold by demanding an independent evaluation from a doctor of our choosing. But that means staying in Denver, going to court, and giving Marcus multiple opportunities to escalate his attacks on all of you. What's the alternative? Rebecca disappears. Tonight, we have contacts in other states, attorneys, social workers, medical professionals who specialize in relocating domestic violence victims. New identity, new location, complete separation from Marcus and his resources. Mashir Rebecca looked around the table at her family. Her mother, who had driven through the night to protect her. Her brother, who had abandoned his work to research her situation. Her cousin, who had risked everything to stand up for her. James, who was facing internal affairs investigation for doing his job properly. I can't ask all of you to sacrifice your lives because I made the mistake of marrying a monster. You didn't make a mistake, Daniel said firmly. You were targeted by a predator who specializes in isolating and controlling vulnerable women. That's not your fault. Grace pulled out another folder, this one containing photographs and documents that made Rebecca's blood run cold. These are Marcus's previous targets. Elena Rodriguez, Sarah Chen, Jennifer Walsh, and 3 other women whose names never made it into court records. The photographs showed women at various stages of their relationships with Marcus. Early pictures with genuine smiles and bright eyes, later images showing the telltale signs of chronic stress, fear, and isolation that Rebecca recognized from her own mirror. What happened to them? Elena is dead. Sarah lost her career and moved across the country. Jennifer survived his retaliation and now helps other women escape similar situations. The other 3? Grace's voice trailed off. Let's just say they learned to stay silent. Tori's phone buzzed with an urgent text message. She read it and swore. Metropolitan Luxury Motors just lost its primary financing arrangement. The bank called an hour ago and demanded immediate repayment of our floor plan loans. They're claiming we violated some technical provision in the lending agreement. Marcus owns significant shares in that bank, Grace said matter-of-factly. This is how he operates. Systematic pressure on every aspect of his target support network until they collapse or submit. James received his own notification and shook his head grimly. Internal Affairs just expanded their investigation. Now they're claiming I've been involved in a pattern of excessive force, complaints, and abuse of authority. 3 anonymous witnesses have come forward with detailed allegations spanning the last 2 years. All fabricated, all funded by Marcus's legal team, all designed to destroy your credibility before you can testify against him, Grace explained. This is war, and Marcus Hamilton fights to win. Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing to the windows where she could see downtown Denver spread out below. Somewhere in this city, Marcus was orchestrating a campaign of destruction against everyone she loved, using his wealth like a weapon to eliminate anyone who dared to protect her. I have to run, she said quietly. It's the only way to protect all of you. Becca, no, Tori started. Yes, this is my problem, my mistake, my responsibility. I won't let Marcus destroy your lives because I was too weak to leave him sooner. Patty rose from her chair with the dignity that had carried her through 35 years of nursing and single motherhood. Rebecca Marie, you are not weak. You survived 2 years of systematic abuse. You protected yourself and your unborn child as well as you could under impossible circumstances. And when the moment came to ask for help, you found the courage to do it. But Mom, but nothing. We're your family, and family stands together. Period. Daniel consulted his notes. Grace, what kind of protection can you provide if Rebecca stays and fights? Limited but not negligible. I have relationships with family court judges who can't be bought, medical professionals who understand domestic violence patterns, and law enforcement contacts who take these cases seriously. Grace's expression grew determined. More importantly, I have 3 years' worth of documentation on Marcus Hamilton's pattern of retaliation against women who try to leave him. You've been building a case against him? Dr. Jennifer Walsh and I have been collecting evidence, testimony, and documentation from his previous victims. We've been waiting for the right opportunity, the right plaintiff, the right set of circumstances to bring him down permanently. Rebecca turned from the window to stare at the attorney. You're saying I could be that opportunity? You're his wife. You have legal standing he can't dismiss. You have witnesses to his violence, medical documentation of the abuse, And most importantly, you have a family willing to stand by you publicly. Grace's voice carried conviction. Most of his previous victims were isolated, financially dependent, and too terrified to fight back. You have resources he doesn't expect. What kind of resources? A cousin who owns her own business and can't be fired. A brother-in-law who's a detective with an impeccable reputation. A mother who's a respected healthcare professional. A brother who works in social services and understands the system. Grace smiled for the first time that morning. Marcus Hamilton may have money, but you have something he's never faced before. A family that fights back. Tori returned to the table with renewed determination. What do we need to do? First, we prevent the psychiatric hold by getting Rebecca evaluated by an independent physician before tomorrow's hearing. Dr. Walsh has already agreed to conduct the assessment this afternoon. Then what? Then we go on offense. File for divorce, demand temporary custody of the unborn child, request spousal support based on the marital assets, and most importantly, file criminal charges for the pattern of domestic violence that preceded yesterday's public assault. Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years, hope mixed with genuine anger. Marcus had spent their entire marriage convincing her she was powerless, worthless, and completely dependent on his protection and provision. But sitting in Grace Mitchell's office, surrounded by family who refused to abandon her, she began to remember who she used to be before fear became her constant companion. If we do this, if we really fight him, he's going to escalate. He's going to try to destroy all of you. Let him try, James said quietly. I've been a cop for 15 years, and I've learned something about bullies. They're only strong when their victims are isolated and helpless. When people stand together, when they fight back with everything they've got, bullies usually discover they're not as powerful as they thought. Grace began organizing the documents with practiced efficiency. We need to move fast. The psychiatric evaluation is at 2 o'clock. The divorce filing happens at 4. And tonight we implement security protocols for everyone in this room. Security protocols? Marcus Hamilton is about to discover that his wife isn't the helpless victim he married. When narcissistic abusers lose control, they become desperate, and desperate men with unlimited resources are capable of anything. Outside the conference room windows, Denver continued its normal rhythm of daily life. But inside, 5 people prepared for a battle that would determine whether love and loyalty could triumph over money and vengeance. The war for Rebecca's freedom was entering its most dangerous phase. His first wife didn't die in an accident. So, Grace Mitchell's words fell like stones into the still water of her conference room, sending ripples of shock through Rebecca and her family. The attorney stood at the head of the polished table, a thick manila folder in her hands and an expression that promised revelations none of them were prepared to hear. Elena Rodriguez Hamilton, Grace continued, opening the file to reveal photographs, police reports, and court documents. Officially ruled an accidental death when her car went off Highway 24 near Woodland Park on November 15, 2022. Single vehicle accident, no witnesses, no skid marks, no apparent mechanical failure. Rebecca felt the conference room spin slightly as she stared at a photograph of a beautiful young woman with dark hair and bright eyes. Eyes that held the same haunted quality Rebecca recognized from her own recent pictures. But the accident wasn't actually an accident, Tori said, though it wasn't really a question. Elena Rodriguez is alive, Grace announced. She's been living under federal witness protection for the past 18 months, and she's willing to testify against Marcus Hamilton. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the building's heating system and the distant sounds of Denver traffic far below. Rebecca gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process information that changed everything she thought she knew about her husband's past. That's impossible, Rebecca whispered. I went to Elena's funeral. Marcus grieved for months. He still keeps her picture in his study and talks about honoring her memory. Grace opened the file wider, revealing police photographs of a burned-out car wreckage. What died in that car was Elena's identity, her old life, and her legal existence as Elena Rodriguez Hamilton. The woman herself escaped 3 days before the staged accident with the help of a federal task force that's been investigating Marcus's business practices for 5 years. Daniel leaned forward, his social worker training kicking in. Federal task force? What kind of business practices? Money laundering, tax evasion, bribery of public officials, and a pattern of witness intimidation spanning back to 2018. Grace pulled out additional documents. The FBI has been building a case against Marcus Hamilton's entire financial empire. Elena's testimony about domestic violence and spousal abuse was just one piece of a much larger investigation. James studied the federal documents with professional interest. Why hasn't this come to light before now? Because Marcus Hamilton is extraordinarily careful, extraordinarily wealthy, and extraordinarily connected. Building a case against him requires perfect evidence, unshakable testimony, and witnesses who can't be bought, intimidated, or eliminated. Grace's expression grew grim. The FBI has been waiting for the right moment to move, and Rebecca's situation may have just provided it. Patty Morrison had remained quiet throughout these revelations, but now she spoke with the kind of calm that came from 35 years of handling medical emergencies. Where is Elena now? Safe house in Oregon. She's been working with federal prosecutors to document Marcus's pattern of abuse, financial manipulation, and retaliation against women who try to leave him. Grace consulted her notes. She wants to meet with Rebecca. Why? Because you're in danger, honey, came a new voice from the conference room doorway. Everyone turned to see a petite woman with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that couldn't disguise the wariness in her posture. She looked like someone who had learned to be constantly alert, to always know where the exits were, to trust no one completely. Elena, Rebecca breathed. Actually, it's Amanda Rodriguez now. Elena Hamilton died in that car 18 months ago. The woman's voice carried a slight Spanish accent and the kind of careful control that came from living with constant fear. I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances, but I couldn't let you face Marcus alone. Grace stood to make introductions. Amanda, this is Rebecca Hamilton and her family. Amanda escaped from Marcus with the help of Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Sarah Chen, Daniel said with recognition, the pharmaceutical researcher Marcus destroyed professionally. Amanda nodded grimly. Sarah wasn't just Marcus's victim. She was an undercover federal agent investigating his money laundering operations. When Marcus retaliated against her for breaking up with him, she decided to help other women escape from his control. The scope of what they were facing began to crystallize in Rebecca's mind. This wasn't just about one man's abuse of his wife. It was about a criminal organization that had been operating under the cover of legitimate business for years. How many other women? Rebecca asked. 7 that we know of, 3 who died under suspicious circumstances, 2 who disappeared entirely, and 2 who escaped with federal help. Amanda's expression grew haunted. I spent 3 years married to Marcus Hamilton, 3 years of systematic isolation, financial control, physical abuse, and psychological torture. When I finally found the courage to leave, he told me exactly what would happen to me. What did he say? That I would die in an accident within 6 months, just like the women before me who had tried to embarrass him publicly. Amanda's voice remained steady, but her hands trembled slightly. He described their deaths in detail, the car accidents, the home invasions, the mysterious illnesses. He wanted me to know that my death had already been planned. Tori felt sick. How did you escape? Agent Chen had been monitoring Marcus's communications for months. She knew he was planning to eliminate me, so the FBI staged my death before he could arrange the real thing. Amanda pulled out a photograph showing the burned car wreckage. They used dental records from a Jane Doe who had died in a house fire the previous year. As far as the world knows, Elena Rodriguez Hamilton died in that accident. Rebecca stared at the woman who had once been Marcus's wife, seeing her own possible future reflected in Amanda's careful composure. What was it like, being married to him? Exactly like what you're experiencing now, I imagine. The gradual isolation from friends and family. The financial control where he monitors every purchase. The way he tracks your location, your communications, your daily activities. Amanda's voice grew bitter. The carefully calculated violence that never leaves marks above the neckline. He held me underwater once, Rebecca said quietly, in our swimming pool. He said it was to teach me not to contradict him in front of his business associates. He did the same thing to me, Multiple times, always with the same explanation, that he was teaching me to be a better wife. Amanda's expression hardened. That's not teaching, Rebecca. That's torture. That's attempted murder. Grace consulted her files. Amanda, tell them about the life insurance policies. Marcus takes out large life insurance policies on all his wives. $5 million with him as the sole beneficiary. He told me it was standard for wealthy couples. But the FBI discovered he'd done the same thing with his previous relationships, including the ones who died under suspicious circumstances. Especially those. Marcus Hamilton has collected over $20 million in life insurance payouts from women who died after trying to leave him. Amanda's voice carried absolute conviction. He's not just an abusive husband, Rebecca. He's a serial killer who uses marriage as his hunting ground. The conference room fell completely silent as the full horror of Marcus's pattern became clear. Rebecca wasn't just dealing with domestic violence. She was married to a man who had systematically murdered multiple women and profited from their deaths. "The baby," Rebecca whispered, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "That's why I had to warn you," Amanda said urgently. "Marcus becomes most dangerous when he discovers his control is threatened. If he finds out the baby isn't his biological child, he'll kill me, without hesitation." The only thing that's kept his previous victims alive temporarily was their usefulness to his public image. Once that usefulness ends, they become liabilities to be eliminated. James had been studying the FBI documents with growing concern. "Amanda, how long do we have before Marcus realizes Rebecca isn't going to submit quietly like his previous victims?" "Not long. He's probably already planning contingencies, accidents, illnesses, psychological breaks that would explain her sudden death." Amanda's voice carried urgent warning. "The FBI wants to move fast, but they need Rebecca's cooperation to make their case." "What kind of cooperation?" Grace answered before Amanda could respond. "They want Rebecca to wear a wire. Get Marcus on record threatening her, describing his plans, maybe even admitting to what happened to his previous victims." "That's incredibly dangerous," Patty said immediately. "Yes, but it might be the only way to stop him permanently," Amanda replied. 7 women have suffered because Marcus Hamilton believes his wealth makes him untouchable. If Rebecca can help the FBI build a case against him, those deaths won't be meaningless. Rebecca looked around the conference room at her family, at Grace Mitchell, who had dedicated years to building this case, at Amanda Rodriguez, who had risked her carefully protected new life to warn her. For 2 years, she'd felt completely powerless against Marcus's control. Now she was being offered a chance to fight back, not just for herself, but for all the women who hadn't survived his abuse. What would I have to do? Meet with him, publicly, safely, with full FBI surveillance. Let him think he's regained control, then guide the conversation toward his threats against you and your family. Amanda's expression grew determined. Make him angry enough to tell the truth about what he's capable of. And if something goes wrong, then federal agents will arrest him immediately, even if it means sacrificing the investigation for your safety, Grace assured her. Rebecca closed her eyes and thought about Michael Torres, the gentle man whose child she carried. Michael had dedicated his life to saving people, to making the world safer and better. If she could honor his memory by stopping Marcus from hurting anyone else, maybe his death would have some meaning. "When do we do this?" Amanda smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Tomorrow afternoon, at the same car dealership where this all began. It's time to finish what Marcus started. I can help you disappear the way I did." Amanda Rodriguez sat in Tori's living room at 9 o'clock that evening, flanked by 2 federal agents whose presence transformed the suburban house into something resembling a command center. Special Agent Sarah Chen, the same pharmaceutical researcher Marcus had tried to destroy professionally, spread surveillance equipment across the coffee table, while Agent Michael Torres from the FBI's Domestic Violence Task Force reviewed security protocols. The irony of Agent Torres sharing a name with Rebecca's deceased lover wasn't lost on anyone, but Rebecca found strange comfort in the coincidence. It felt like Michael was somehow still protecting her, even from beyond death. "The wire is virtually undetectable," Agent Chen explained, holding up a device no larger than a button. "It transmits to receivers positioned throughout the car dealership and will have agents stationed as customers, salespeople, and security personnel. Rebecca examined the tiny microphone, trying to imagine herself sitting across from Marcus while wearing it, guiding their conversation toward topics that might get her killed if he discovered what she was doing. "What exactly am I supposed to get him to admit?" she asked. Agent Torres consulted his notes. "Threats against you or your family, acknowledgement of his previous pattern of retaliation against women who left him, and, if possible, any direct admissions about Elena Rodriguez's supposed death. He's too smart to confess to murder on tape." "Maybe," Amanda said quietly, "but Marcus's greatest weakness is his ego. When he thinks he's won, when he believes he has complete control, he likes to explain exactly how clever he's been. He wants his victims to understand the full scope of his power." Tori brought coffee for everyone, her hands shaking slightly as she processed what they were planning. What if something goes wrong? What if Marcus realizes Rebecca is recording him? "Then we abort immediately," Agent Chen said firmly. "Rebecca's safety is our first priority. We'll have agents positioned to intervene within seconds if the situation becomes dangerous." James studied the surveillance equipment with professional interest. "What about afterward? If this works, if you get the evidence you need, what happens to Rebecca and her family?" "Marcus Hamilton will be arrested on federal charges, including racketeering, money laundering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit murder," Agent Torres replied. "With Amanda's testimony, the evidence we've collected, and Rebecca's recorded conversation, we'll have enough to ensure he never sees freedom again." "And if it doesn't work," Agent Chen and Amanda exchanged a meaningful look, "then we implement the disappearance protocol. New identities for Rebecca and her child, relocation to a secure location, complete separation from her previous life." Rebecca felt a chill at the thought of leaving everything behind. Her family, her hometown, her identity as Rebecca Morrison Hamilton. But as she looked around Tori's living room at the people who had risked everything to protect her, she realized some things were worth any sacrifice. "There's something else you need to know," Amanda said carefully. "Something about the other women Marcus targeted. We've been in contact with them, building a network of survivors who can support each other." "What kind of network?" "Women who understand what it's like to live in that kind of terror, who know how to rebuild their lives after escaping. We have doctors, lawyers, social workers, even law enforcement officers who've survived relationships with wealthy, powerful abusers." Agent Chen pulled out a tablet displaying a secure communication platform. "There are currently 47 women in our network across 12 states. They provide everything from safe housing to emotional support to professional assistance for women trying to escape similar situations." 47 women? Patty asked in amazement. "Domestic violence doesn't discriminate based on wealth or social status," Amanda explained. "In fact, wealthy abusers can be more dangerous because they have resources to maintain control that ordinary criminals don't possess. Private investigators, expensive lawyers, political connections, social influence, all used as weapons against women trying to escape." Daniel leaned forward, his social worker instincts engaged. "How do you identify women who need help?" "Sometimes they find us through word of mouth. Sometimes law enforcement or healthcare professionals make referrals. And sometimes," Amanda's voice grew sad, "we read about them in obituaries and wish we'd found them sooner." The living room fell quiet as everyone processed the scope of what they were discussing. This wasn't just about Rebecca and Marcus. It was about a systematic problem that destroyed lives while hiding behind respectability and wealth. "The women Marcus killed," Rebecca said quietly. "Tell me about them." Amanda consulted her phone, pulling up files that the FBI had compiled over years of investigation. Maria Santos, age 26, supposedly died in a home invasion in 2019. She'd been trying to leave Marcus after 8 months of dating. Nothing was stolen from her apartment. Catherine Williams, age 31, died of sudden cardiac arrest in 2020, despite having no history of heart problems. She'd filed a police report claiming Marcus had been stalking her after their breakup. And Jessica Miller, age 28, died in a single car accident 6 weeks after ending her relationship with Marcus. Her family insists she was an excellent driver, who would never have been speeding on mountain roads in bad weather. Each name hit Rebecca like a physical blow. These were real women with real lives, dreams, and families who loved them. They'd made the mistake of trusting Marcus Hamilton, just as she had, and they'd paid for that trust with their lives. How did he get away with it for so long? Money buys silence, Agent Torres said grimly. Coroners who don't ask uncomfortable questions, police detectives who accept obvious explanations, judges who dismiss cases without proper investigation. Marcus Hamilton has been very careful to spread his wealth among people who could cause problems for him. But not careful enough, Agent Chen added. The FBI has been tracking financial irregularities in his businesses for years. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, payments to individuals with criminal backgrounds, legal settlements that were clearly bribes. We just needed someone with direct knowledge of his personal crimes to tie it all together. Rebecca looked at Amanda, seeing her own possible future in the other woman's careful composure. How do you do it? How do you live with knowing what he's capable of? What he did to those other women? By making sure their deaths matter, Amanda replied with quiet intensity. By helping other women escape before they become statistics. By building a network that Marcus Hamilton and men like him can't intimidate or buy. And by waiting for the right moment to destroy him completely, Agent Chen added. Tomorrow's meeting isn't just about recording his threats, Rebecca. It's about ending his ability to hurt anyone ever again. Tori had been quiet during most of this conversation, but now she spoke with the protective fury that had motivated her from the beginning. What do you need from the rest of us? How can we help? Keep doing exactly what you've been doing, Agent Torres said. Stand by Rebecca publicly, maintain the family support system that Marcus doesn't understand, and trust that we've been planning this operation for a very long time. There's one more thing, Amanda said, reaching into her purse to pull out a small velvet box. This belonged to Maria Santos. She was wearing it when she died, and her family gave it to me after they learned the truth about Marcus. She opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a small cross pendant. All of us wear something to remember the women who didn't survive, a reminder of why this fight matters. Rebecca took the necklace with trembling hands, feeling the weight of 7 women's lives in the simple jewelry. I'll wear it tomorrow, when I face Marcus. You won't be facing him alone, Amanda promised. Every woman in our network will be there with you in spirit. Every federal agent will be ready to protect you, and every person in this room will be fighting for you. Agent Chen began packing up the surveillance equipment as the meeting wound down. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow will probably be the most dangerous thing you've ever done. Marcus Hamilton has killed women for far less than what we're asking you to do. I know, but it's also the most important thing you could possibly do, not just for yourself, but for every woman who might become his target in the future. Rebecca fastened Maria Santos's necklace around her throat, feeling the silver cross settle against her skin like a promise. For 2 years, she'd been Marcus Hamilton's victim. Tomorrow she would become something he'd never faced before, a woman who refused to be silenced. Agent Chen, she said quietly, what time do we start? 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Metropolitan Luxury Motors. And Rebecca? The agent's voice carried absolute conviction. We're going to end this, all of it. Outside Tori's house, Denver slept peacefully, unaware that in a suburban living room, 8 people had just planned the downfall of one of the city's most powerful men. The network of survivors had activated, federal agents were in position, and tomorrow would determine whether justice could triumph over wealth and violence. Marcus Hamilton was about to discover that some women fight back, and some fights can't be won with money. I want to make a deal. Rebecca's words carried across the pristine showroom of Metropolitan Luxury Motors, reaching Marcus Hamilton, where he sat in the customer service area like a king holding court. 2 days had passed since his arrest, and he'd used every resource at his disposal to project an image of complete control despite the legal chaos swirling around him. He looked exactly the same, expensive suit perfectly tailored, silver hair immaculately styled, pale blue eyes calculating every advantage. But Rebecca could see something new in his expression, a sharp edge of desperation that he was trying very hard to hide. Rebecca, Marcus said, rising from his chair with the smooth grace of a predator, I was hoping you'd come to your senses. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a simple blue dress that showed her pregnancy without emphasizing it, minimal makeup that didn't hide the fading bruise on her cheek, and Maria Santos's silver cross necklace visible at her throat. Most importantly, She wore the nearly invisible wire that would transmit every word to the federal agents positioned throughout the dealership. "I've been thinking about our situation," Rebecca said, moving to sit across from him at the small conference table where they'd signed the lease agreement for her Honda minivan just 3 days earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That fighting you was a mistake, that I let my pregnancy hormones and my cousin's interference cloud my judgment." The words tasted like poison, but Rebecca forced them out with the right combination of submission and exhaustion that Marcus would find believable. His expression softened slightly, the way it always did when he sensed victory. "I'm glad you're finally being reasonable. The psychiatric evaluation has been postponed while we work things out privately. What do you want from me?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, savoring what he believed was his triumph. Around the showroom, federal agents disguised as customers and salespeople continued their casual browsing while hanging on every word transmitted by Rebecca's wire. "First, you'll come home immediately. No more staying with your cousin. No more family interference. No more outside influences on your decision-making. And then you'll recant your accusations about domestic violence. Tell the police you were confused, emotional, that the stress of pregnancy made you misinterpret a minor marital disagreement." Marcus's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone who had orchestrated similar retractions before. "What about Tori and James? What about my mother and Daniel? What about them?" Marcus's tone grew cold. "They interfered with our marriage, Rebecca. There have to be consequences for that kind of behavior." Rebecca felt a chill of fear, but she pressed forward. "What kind of consequences?" "Your cousin's dealership is already facing financial difficulties. It would be a shame if those problems became insurmountable, and Detective Sullivan's career prospects seem rather dim given his recent performance reviews. You're threatening my family." "I'm explaining reality." Marcus leaned forward, his pale eyes glittering with the kind of malicious satisfaction he'd always shown when demonstrating his power. "People who cross Marcus Hamilton learn to regret it, every single time." Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to the cross necklace at her throat, drawing strength from the memory of Maria Santos and the other women who hadn't survived to see justice. "What about your previous wives? Did they regret crossing you too?" Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something dark and dangerous crossing his features. "My previous relationships ended badly because the women involved made poor choices. They chose confrontation over cooperation." "Is that what happened to Elena?" "Elena died in a car accident, a tragic loss that I still mourn." "But she wasn't really dead, was she, Marcus?" Rebecca kept her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Elena Rodriguez is still alive." The change in Marcus was instantaneous and terrifying. His carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing something cold and reptilian underneath. His hands clenched on the table, and Rebecca could see him calculating how much she knew and where she might have learned it. "That's an interesting theory," he said quietly. "Where did you hear such a ridiculous story?" "From Elena herself. She told me about the life insurance policies, Marcus, about the pattern of convenient accidents that happen to women who try to leave you." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the showroom floor. Around them, the undercover federal agents tensed imperceptibly, ready to intervene at the first sign of violence. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its smooth control. "Elena Rodriguez died in that car. I attended her funeral. I grieved for months." "You grieved for your own convenience being disrupted," Rebecca replied, standing to face him. "Just like you'll grieve when I have my accident, and when the baby you think is yours conveniently disappears along with me." "The baby?" Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. "What about the baby?" Rebecca felt the moment crystallize around them. This was the revelation that would either destroy Marcus completely or get her killed in the attempt. The wire at her throat felt like a lifeline connecting her to the agents who were her only protection. "The baby isn't yours, Marcus." The words fell between them like grenades, and Rebecca watched Marcus's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and calculating fury in the space of seconds. "What did you say?" "You heard me. The baby I'm carrying isn't your biological child. It never was." Marcus moved around the table with predatory grace, closing the distance between them till Rebecca could smell his expensive cologne and see the tiny blood vessels in his pale eyes. That's impossible. I track your cycle. I monitor your fertility. I control every aspect of your reproductive health. You controlled everything except the weekend you went to Switzerland. The weekend I spent with Michael Torres, remembering what it felt like to be with a man who actually loved me. The slap came so fast Rebecca didn't have time to flinch. Her head snapped to the side and she tasted blood where her teeth cut into her lip. Around the showroom, federal agents began moving into position. "You lying whore," Marcus hissed. "You think you can humiliate me? You think you can make me raise another man's bastard?" "Michael is dead," Rebecca said quietly, touching her bleeding lip. "Killed by a drunk driver 6 weeks after our night together. He never knew about the baby." "Good," Marcus snarled. "One less problem to eliminate. Like you eliminated Maria Santos, Catherine Williams, Jessica Miller?" Marcus's face went white as he realized how much she knew. "You've been talking to people you shouldn't talk to, learning things that are dangerous for your health. Are you threatening to kill me, Marcus? Like you killed your other women who tried to leave?" "I don't threaten, Rebecca. I simply explain consequences." His voice dropped to a whisper that the wire barely picked up. "Women who embarrass me publicly, who try to steal from me, who betray me with other men, they have accidents. Car crashes, home invasions, sudden illnesses that can't be traced. And their life insurance policies pay you millions of dollars. A small compensation for my emotional suffering." Marcus smiled, and Rebecca saw the face of a killer beneath his handsome features. "But you won't be collecting any insurance, my dear. You'll simply disappear one night. The grieving husband will search for months, offer rewards, hire private investigators. Eventually, everyone will assume you ran off with your lover, except your lover's already dead." Rebecca felt the trap closing around Marcus with every word he spoke. The federal agents had everything they needed now: direct admissions of murder, threats against her life, and enough evidence to ensure he never hurt anyone again. "What about the baby?" "What baby?" Marcus's smile turned genuinely evil. "There was no baby, Rebecca. You were never pregnant. Just another lie from an unstable woman who couldn't handle being married to a successful man. You'd kill your own child? It's not my child. You made that very clear." Marcus leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "But don't worry. Your death will be quick and clean. Professional. The kind of service that costs extra but ensures there are never any questions asked." That was when the showroom exploded into action. "FBI, nobody move!" Special Agent Sarah Chen emerged from behind a display of luxury sedans, her weapon drawn and her voice carrying absolute authority. Agent Torres appeared from the customer service area, flanked by 2 Denver police detectives. Throughout the showroom, undercover agents revealed themselves, creating a perimeter that made escape impossible. Marcus spun around, his face cycling through shock, rage, and desperate calculation. "This is entrapment. I was coerced. My lawyers will—" "Your lawyers can visit you in federal prison," Agent Chen said calmly, producing handcuffs. "Marcus Hamilton, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, and making threats against a federal witness." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus looked back at Rebecca with such pure hatred that she actually stepped backward. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think federal prison can hold someone with my resources? You think your pathetic family will be safe just because I'm temporarily inconvenienced?" "Actually, Mr. Hamilton," Agent Torres said cheerfully, "it is over. The recording equipment picked up every word you just said. Your admission to multiple murders, your threats against Mrs. Hamilton and her family, and your detailed description of how you've been killing women for years. Plus," Agent Chen added, "Amanda Rodriguez is testifying before a federal grand jury tomorrow morning, along with testimony from the families of your victims, financial records showing your insurance fraud, and evidence of your pattern of witness intimidation." Marcus's face went completely white as he realized the scope of what he was facing. "Amanda is dead. I attended her funeral." "Funny thing about that," Agent Chen said with satisfaction, "federal witness protection is very good at staging deaths when necessary. Amanda has been alive and well for the past 18 months, documenting every detail of your previous crimes." As federal agents escorted Marcus toward the exit, He looked back one more time at Rebecca, but instead of the terrified, submissive woman he'd controlled for 2 years, he saw someone who had found the courage to fight back. "Enjoy your victory, Rebecca," Marcus called out as the agents pushed him through the showroom doors. "It won't last long." But Rebecca was no longer listening to his threats. She was surrounded by federal agents. Her family was safe, and Maria Santos's silver cross lay warm against her throat, a reminder that some fights are worth the risk, and some victories are worth any price. Marcus Hamilton's reign of terror was finally over. The recording you just heard was broadcast live to the FBI. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the same car dealership where her nightmare had begun, watching her 6-week-old daughter sleep peacefully in her carrier. Outside the showroom windows, Denver was beginning to show the first signs of spring, and the Rocky Mountains stood majestically against a clear blue sky. "She's beautiful," Tori said softly, adjusting the baby's pink blanket with practiced ant-like efficiency. "Michael would have been so proud." "I think about that every day," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying none of the fear and exhaustion that had marked her conversation 6 months earlier. How different things would have been if he'd lived to see her born. The baby, Sofia Elena Torres, named for Michael's grandmother and Amanda Rodriguez's courage, stirred slightly in her sleep but didn't wake. She had Michael's dark eyes and olive skin, traits that made it obvious to anyone who looked at her that Marcus Hamilton had never been her biological father. James approached from across the showroom, carrying a newspaper with obvious satisfaction. The sentencing hearing made the front page of the Denver Post. Life without parole on the murder charges, plus an additional 40 years on the federal racketeering charges. How did Marcus react? According to the reporter who was there, he maintained his innocence right up until the judge read the sentence. Then he started screaming about appeals, claiming he was framed, threatening everyone involved in the prosecution. James's expression grew grim. His lawyers had to physically restrain him from attacking the prosecutor's table. Rebecca felt a complicated mix of relief and sadness. The man she'd married, or thought she'd married, was gone forever, replaced by the revealed monster who would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. There was justice in that outcome, but also tragedy in how many lives had been destroyed before he was finally stopped. "What about his business empire?" "Completely dismantled," Daniel said, joining the family gathering with legal documents in hand. "The FBI seized all his assets under federal forfeiture laws. His companies are being liquidated, and the proceeds will go to victim compensation and domestic violence prevention programs." Tori looked up from admiring the baby. "Speaking of which, how's the foundation coming along?" Rebecca smiled, the kind of genuine expression that had been missing from her face for years. "The Maria Santos Foundation for Domestic Violence Prevention officially opens next month. We've got funding for safe houses, legal assistance, counseling services, and a 24-hour crisis hotline." "And Amanda is running it?" "Co-directing with Dr. Jennifer Walsh. They make an amazing team. Amanda understands the survivor's perspective, and Dr. Walsh has the medical and administrative expertise to make it work on a large scale." The foundation had been Rebecca's idea, born from her desire to honor the women who hadn't survived Marcus's abuse and to ensure that future victims had resources she'd never known existed. The life insurance money Marcus had collected from his murdered wives had been forfeited to the federal government, and Rebecca had successfully petitioned for those funds to be redirected toward domestic violence prevention. Grace Mitchell approached from her office carrying final divorce papers and wearing the satisfied expression of an attorney who had just won the biggest case of her career. "It's official. The divorce is finalized, the restraining order is permanent, and you are legally free from any connection to Marcus Hamilton." "What about his threats? The ones he made when they arrested him?" "Empty words from a desperate man facing life in prison," Grace assured her. "Marcus Hamilton no longer has access to money, lawyers, or the criminal contacts he used to intimidate people. He's just another federal prisoner now, and federal prisoners don't have the resources to threaten anyone." Rebecca had legally returned to her maiden name, Rebecca Morrison, and had no intention of ever using the Hamilton name again. Sofia would grow up as Sofia Elena Torres, carrying her father's name and legacy instead of any connection to the man who had terrorized her mother. "There's something else," Grace continued, pulling out additional documents. The Victim Compensation Fund has approved your claim. You'll receive financial support for counseling, medical expenses, and living costs while you rebuild your life. How much? Enough to ensure you and Sophia are completely independent. Enough to buy a house, finish your education, and never have to depend on anyone for financial security again. The baby chose that moment to wake up, her dark eyes focusing on her mother's face, with the kind of trust that made Rebecca's chest tighten with protective love. For 2 years, she'd lived in terror that Marcus would discover the truth about Sophia's paternity. Now her daughter would grow up knowing the story of her real father, a man who had dedicated his life to saving people and making the world safer. "Have you decided what you want to do next?" Patty Morrison asked, having arrived with homemade baby blankets and the kind of maternal support that had sustained Rebecca through the darkest months of her marriage. "I'm going back to school to finish my teaching degree," Rebecca said, lifting Sophia from her carrier to feed her. "There's a program at Colorado State University for women returning to education after domestic violence situations. I want to work with children, maybe become a school counselor." "Following in Michael's footsteps," Tori observed, "helping people, making a difference. It's what he would have wanted, for both of us." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and personal healing. The trial had attracted national coverage as federal prosecutors detailed Marcus Hamilton's systematic pattern of murdering women who tried to leave him. Amanda Rodriguez's testimony had been devastating, describing years of abuse that culminated in her staged death to escape his control. But the most powerful moment had been when the families of Marcus's victims, Maria Santos, Catherine Williams, and Jessica Miller, had stood together in court to deliver impact statements. Their words had painted a picture of 3 vibrant women whose lives had been cut short by one man's narcissistic rage and sense of entitlement. "Any word from the other women in the network?" James asked. "The support group is thriving," Rebecca replied. "We have over 60 women now, across 15 states. Amanda says it's the most effective domestic violence prevention program she's ever seen. Women helping women, survivors supporting each other through the healing process." The network had grown beyond Amanda's original vision, becoming a comprehensive support system that provided everything from emergency housing to job training to legal assistance. Most importantly, it gave women something Rebecca had never had during her marriage: the knowledge that they weren't alone, that other people understood their situation, and that escape was possible. "Rebecca," Daniel said carefully, "I have to ask, do you ever regret fighting back instead of just disappearing when Amanda offered?" Rebecca looked down at Sophia, who was nursing contentedly while her dark eyes tracked the movement of people around the showroom. Her daughter would grow up in a world where Marcus Hamilton could never hurt anyone, where his pattern of violence had been exposed and stopped permanently. "Never," she said firmly. "Running would have saved me, but it wouldn't have saved the next woman Marcus targeted, or the one after that. Fighting back saved lives." 7 confirmed murders over 8 years, Grace added quietly. "If you hadn't been brave enough to wear that wire, if you hadn't been willing to confront him publicly, Marcus Hamilton would still be out there killing women." The weight of that responsibility had been difficult to bear during the months of legal proceedings, but Rebecca had found strength in the knowledge that Sophia would inherit a world slightly safer than the one she'd been born into. Tori moved to the showroom windows, looking out at the parking lot where Marcus had struck Rebecca just 6 months earlier. "You know what I realized yesterday?" "What's that?" "This dealership has sold more cars in the past 6 months than in any comparable period in our history. Apparently, people want to buy vehicles from the place where Marcus Hamilton was finally brought to justice." "Poetic justice," James observed with satisfaction. "More than that," Rebecca said, adjusting Sophia's blanket as she finished nursing, "it's proof that sometimes standing up to bullies actually works. That money and power aren't always enough to protect people from the consequences of their actions." As if summoned by their conversation, Amanda Rodriguez entered the showroom with her usual careful awareness of exits and potential threats. But her expression carried something new, hope mixed with the wariness that would probably never completely leave her. "How's the foundation setup going?" Rebecca asked. "Better than we dared hope. We've got 3 safe houses operational, a legal clinic staffed by volunteer attorneys, and a crisis hotline that's already helped over 200 women in its first month." Amanda's voice carried quiet pride. More importantly, we've had 12 law enforcement referrals of suspected domestic violence cases involving wealthy perpetrators. Any that remind you of Marcus? Two that are concerning enough that we've contacted federal authorities. Apparently, Marcus Hamilton wasn't unique. He was just particularly successful at hiding his crimes. Advertiser-friendly. The conversation was interrupted by Sophia's soft cry, and Rebecca stood to walk her around the showroom while she settled back to sleep. As she moved past the Honda minivan that had started this entire chain of events, Rebecca felt a profound sense of gratitude for the series of coincidences that had brought her to safety. If Tori hadn't been working that day, if she hadn't recognized her cousin despite 2 years of separation, if she hadn't been brave enough to stand up to Marcus publicly, if James hadn't been willing to risk his career to arrest a powerful man, if Amanda hadn't been willing to emerge from witness protection to help another woman escape. "What are you thinking about?" Tori asked, joining her beside the minivan. "How many things had to go right for this to end the way it did? How easily it could have gone wrong if any one of you had decided it wasn't your problem." "It was always our problem," Patty Morrison said firmly, speaking with the authority of a woman who had raised 2 children alone and never backed down from protecting her family. "You're our family. Sophia is our family. Marcus Hamilton made it our problem the moment he decided to hurt you." Rebecca looked around the showroom at the people who had risked everything to save her. Tori, who had confronted a billionaire to protect her cousin. James, who had jeopardized his career to arrest an untouchable man. Daniel, who had abandoned his work to research her situation. Her mother, who had driven through the night to stand by her side. Amanda, who had sacrificed her carefully protected anonymity to help another woman escape. Grace, who had dedicated years to building a case against Marcus. And Agent Chen, who had orchestrated the investigation that brought him down. "I used to think I was alone," Rebecca said quietly. "For 2 years, Marcus convinced me that I had no one, that no one would believe me, that no one would help me even if they did believe me." "But you were wrong," Sophia stirred in her arms, and Rebecca smiled down at her daughter. "You were never alone. You just couldn't see the people who were waiting to help you." Outside the showroom, Denver continued its normal rhythm of daily life. People going to work, children walking to school, families living ordinary lives without fear or surveillance, or the constant threat of violence. It was the kind of normal life Rebecca had thought she'd lost forever when she married Marcus Hamilton. Now, holding her daughter in the same place where her nightmare had begun, Rebecca Morrison understood something she'd never fully grasped during her marriage. Love wasn't about control, possession, or the systematic destruction of independence. Love was about standing together when times got difficult, protecting each other when danger threatened, and refusing to abandon family even when the cost was high. Marcus Hamilton had been wealthy, powerful, and connected. But in the end, he'd lost to something he'd never understood and couldn't buy. A group of ordinary people who refused to let evil triumph when they had the power to stop it. Sophia Elena Torres would grow up hearing the story of her mother's courage, her father's dedication to helping others, and the family that had fought a war to protect them both. She would understand that sometimes the most important battles are fought by ordinary people who choose to be extraordinary when circumstances demand it. As spring sunlight streamed through the showroom windows, Rebecca Morrison held her daughter close and felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope for the future, gratitude for the present, and the absolute certainty that some victories are worth any price. The battle for Rebecca's freedom was over. The life she'd built with that freedom was just beginning.